This is the story of how I went from these small, kind of sad looking croissants to these super light and fluffy croissants, and it's all thanks to one recipe by Saffitz. Hello everyone, I hope you're having a good day. So to start the story off properly, we've got to go back about a year. So it's June 2020, I just finished my exams, and I was midway through binge watching this baking series by Paul Hollywood. He kind of travels around different European countries, and to America actually, looking at all these baked goods. And I was in a really baking mood, so I decided croissants, they were the things I was going to make. And I was going to make them really well, so I ended up spending a whole week every single day making croissants, and after 7 days of making them I was still shit, and I was so tired out and frustrated from them never working that I just decided to give it a miss for a whole year. So fast forward 1 year, I've done a lot more baking since then, started this channel and done all these videos of course, and I decided to give croissants another go. So I learned a few things from last time. My lamination was kind of better than it was at least, but the main problem I was having was during the second proving step. So this is after you've laminated the dough and the butter together, cut your triangles and rolled them, and this is a really crucial step because this is where the croissant gets all its puff from and why it's so light and airy. So this step's really important, and normally one of two things would happen: either it would just underproof and just never puff up at all, or I'd try and heat up a little bit to speed up the proving process and the butter would completely melt out of it and it'd be ruined. So it was that step that I really wanted to focus on when I'm trying to learn it this time. Now I do have my recipes from last time in my journal, but I thought I'd go into this completely fresh, start from scratch. So I took a recipe from Erin McDowell, who's a kind of popular YouTuber on a Food 52 channel. She's got some really good recipes, so yeah, I'll put a link in the description. And she's got a whole, I think it's like an hour-long video explaining how she does her yeasted puff pastry. So I thought there was a lot to go on in there, I could learn a lot from it. So I tried that recipe first. I'll put some footage on screen of me doing that, making the dough, and then she makes a butter and flour block, and she says this makes it more malleable to make the lamination easier. So that's what I did. Chilled them both, and the key thing with the lamination step is getting the dough and the butter the same texture, so not the same temperature. You want them the same texture so that when you roll them out they spread evenly. If the butter's too soft, it's going to smear into the dough. If the butter's too hard, it's going to crack and shatter into pieces. If the dough's too soft, you're just going to mush it all over and you're not going to get nice consistent layers. It's going to all bunch up on the side of the butter. And if the dough's too hard, it's just going to be really hard to roll. So it's getting that fine balance between the two. And I'll explain later on in Saffitz's recipe, the one that worked perfectly, how she manages that and how I achieved it. This feeling of knowing when the dough and the butter are at the right temperature is just something that takes time and practice to achieve. And you can see with this first attempt, the dough's far too soft, so as I'm rolling it out, it kind of bunches up at the side of the butter, and I eventually ended up chopping that off, so my butter to dough ratio was a bit wacky in this one. I'll skip through most of the steps with this recipe because I'll explain it more with Claire's version, but once I'd laminated my dough, chopped it into the triangles, and rolled it up, I was ready to do the proofing, and for this first attempt it was just awful. It was quite a hot day here, so I just left them on the countertop to try and proof. Didn't work very well. I tried to put some in the oven with the light on, didn't work. I also tried to put one in a cast iron pan with some cling film over the top in the oven to try and keep the humidity up. Didn't work either. And you can see here, because it didn't puff up properly, it's completely underbaked on the inside. It's still tight and compact, whereas it should be nice, light and fluffy and split into the different layers. So this is probably my 10th attempt at croissants in my life, so like 7 or 8 last year, a couple before that, and then this one, and it's just demoralizing when it just doesn't work every single time. But I kept at it, and I found this recipe by Saffitz, who's just a phenomenal baker. She was on Bon Appetit and now she's a dessert person. Really good baker. I'll put a link in the description for her recipe if you want to check it out. If you ever do try and make croissants, this is the one to go for. Follow it step by step and it'll be perfect. So the key thing with hers was her proofing technique and the size of her croissants as well. They're massive, and I just trust her recipe, so I thought I'd go for it. I thought if anyone was going to fix it, it was going to be her recipe. So you mix all of your dough ingredients together, proof it for about half an hour to an hour, just until it kind of puffs up a bit, and then I left mine overnight for use the next day. And instead of doing a butter and flour block, Claire just does a butter block for her recipe, so that's what I did as well. The one difference that I changed is that the dimensions of the block. So normally you roll out the dough to about double the length of the butter block, and then fold the butter into the dough and then roll it. And one thing I found when I did the first recipe by Erin McDowell was that if the butter and the dough are really thick, you have to do a lot of rolling before you can start doing your folds. And this is where I found a lot of my problems were when I was doing the lamination. It makes it a lot harder to roll them out when they're together. So I thought for this one, I would make my butter and dough almost the thinness so they're ready to be folded straight away, if that makes sense. I'll put my dimensions in the description down below so you can see what I mean, but basically, in short, what it means is that we roll out the dough quite big, we roll out the butter quite big, and then put the dough down, drop the butter on top, fold the dough over the butter, and then with just a tiny amount of rolling, kind of just to even everything and seal it, we're ready to do the fold straight away without having to spend ages pressing it out, and kind of that's where errors can go wrong. So then we're going to do the four-fold, it's like the book fold. So you fold the two ends into the center and then fold them on top of each other. It kind of looks like a book from the side. And then we want to pop this into the freezer for 30 minutes and then in the fridge for an hour. This is how Claire kind of perfects the texture, so it's easy to roll out and we don't get the butter cracking, we don't get the butter too soft. So that's what I did, just following her recipe exactly. After that time, dropped it out again with the tiniest bit of flour. We don't want to put too much flour into this because it's going to ruin the ratios and stuff. And then we're going to roll it kind of against the fold. So the next fold is going to be perpendicular to the first one, just to make the layers more even. And this is going to be a three-fold. So we just move one end, kind of, yeah, we take 1/3 and fold it over, and then fold the other end over the top of that. Freeze it for half an hour, put it in the fridge for an hour, and then we're ready to roll it out into the dimensions for our croissants. And I've forgotten these completely, but I'll put them on the screen here, just so you remember, and I'll put them in the description as well if you follow the recipe along. And Claire's croissants are thick and fat, so they have 50 grams of butter in each one, so they're really decadent, kind of like the ones you'd get in a pastry shop. That's what I was going for. And I'll show you later on, there's a new bakery that opened in my town, and I got a croissant to compare. So yeah, I'll show you that later on as well. But you just roll your dough out, it doesn't matter which way, as long as you get the right dimensions. And then we're going to cut triangles into this for the croissants. And then the technique for it is to just stretch it a little bit lengthways, and then stretch out the base a little bit as well to kind of widen it. And then you roll it from the base to the tip and then flatten it so the tip is on the bottom, just to kind of seal it. We don't want that unraveling when we're proving it or baking it. And then this is the key step of all the steps. This is the most important. I'm going to timestamp it in big bold letters. This is the key step. So how Claire does it, you take a pan of water that you can put in the oven and pop some water in it and bring it to a simmer. And your oven has to be cold, by the way. Don't turn your oven on at all. So the pan of water is simmering. Pop that into your oven, shut the door, and just leave it for like half an hour or so. It's going to do two things. That's going to increase the temperature of the oven, which is what the yeast wants to grow and prove, and like release that carbon dioxide to puff the dough up. But secondly, it's also going to bring a lot of humidity in there, which is another thing that yeast needs. Not many people know this, but yeah, yeast likes moisture as well. So that's why we also are going to cover our croissants with cling film. That's to maintain as much moisture in as possible so the yeast can puff up nicely. So after that half an hour, pop your croissants onto the baking sheet on some parchment paper, and then take the pan out of the oven, pop your baking sheet into the oven, close the door, and then leave it for like 2.5–3 hours. And the key thing is that the dough should kind of jiggle when it's proved. They're going to be super light and delicate and really soft to the touch, which is nice for baking. They're going to be really soft and fluffy. But we actually want to wash these with a mix of 1 egg yolk and 1 tablespoon of cream. And with them like this, it's going to be quite hard to do, so Claire pops hers into the fridge for about 15 to 20 minutes, just to firm up a little bit. So that's what I did, and it does make it a lot easier to brush with the egg wash, so you don't like poke any holes into the croissants. And this is the exciting bit, so preheat your oven. I forgot the temperature, but again, pop it on the screen, and bake these for 20 minutes, and then turn them, and then bake them for 10 or 15 minutes longer, kind of just depends on how dark you like them. And I cannot explain how excited I was when these came out of the oven. So after all these like failed attempts of making croissants, these were like the pinnacle of my baking career, I think. Like there's nothing I've made that's anywhere near as good as these. Technically they're really hard to do, and yeah, the amount of times I've failed just shows that they're just so difficult to do. And Claire's recipe, I think, is just perfect. So I'm really thankful to her, basically. And I'm glad that I was finally able to do these. It's one that I wanted to tick off my list for ages. And the thing with these as well is that making the dough is so time consuming. You really need to make it in a big batch. So this one makes 4 croissants, right? But if I were to make this again, I'd probably do 4 times the size. And then you can freeze the croissants before you prove them. So it probably takes about the same time to make 4 times the dough as it does to make one. So just time efficiency, it's better to make a bigger batch. But I didn't want to go in and commit all them ingredients before I could actually make the recipe properly. So now I've done it. My croissants flown around this house. I'm gonna make a big batch, freeze them, and gonna be ready for all them like lazy Sundays. I just want a nice freshly baked croissant without leaving the house. I've got it. Just to finish the video off, I'll show you some footage from the bakery. when I brought it back to the house, but yeah, I'll show you what a professional croissant should look like, and then we'll finish off with what my croissant looked like, and I might do a little voiceover as well, just explaining kind of the texture and what it tasted like, and so then pass it over to future Jake. It's perfect, basically. This is what I'm going for in this series. I want to get one that looks like this. So let me break it open for you. Key thing is like super light and fluffy. It's evenly baked through all the way. And there's clear layers. I don't know how well you can see the layers. See all the different layers there. And now we can compare to the ones that I made. And to be honest, I think I was pretty close. I wasn't expecting to get this close, but Claire's recipe is fantastic. So it's super, super crispy. You can hear as we're cutting through all them fine layers. Nice and delicate, but I'm really interested in what it looks like when we cut it open, and it was perfect. Nice and fluffy, lots of little layers, exactly what I wanted.